Hey everybody, welcome to another episode and thank you for joining me once again. Well, today I'm going to show you how I put strap lugs onto a Zorki 4K rangefinder body. These cameras were made without strap lugs and I've managed to fit some to this Zorki 4K to create a not quite unique but certainly an unusual and rather uncommon camera, and I'm going to be showing you how I did that and how you can do it very shortly. I'm also going to show you this groovy, very cool little light meter, clip-on light meter that goes onto the hot shoe or the cold shoe, as in this case, of any camera, and turns a camera without a light meter into a camera that is rather easier to shoot, and I think it looks really very cool on the little Zorki one here, so we'll be coming to that very shortly. First though, let me tell you about this Zorki 4K with strap lugs. Now I'm really proud of this little project. It's a project that has taken a few ups and downs. I did have a false start a little while ago, which I'll talk about, and by and large this project has been on my mind, cooking in the back of my mind for about a decade, and I'll tell you how it all came about. Well, around about 10 years ago, or maybe more than 10 years ago, I bought an old Zorki 4, much like this one, and it wasn't working. Now, I can't remember what was up with it. I bought it very cheap as I bought it very cheap as spares or repairs, and of course I couldn't repair it, but it did have a rather nice lens on it, which is this lens here. This is the nicest Jupiter 8 I've ever shot. Very nice lens, 1967 lens, and it also importantly had a body not covered in this earlier vulcanite material that I'll show you shortly, but in this later nylon material, which I've always rather preferred. So what I actually did was I took the body shell from that camera and put it onto the 4K. Now it actually matches the body covering of the 4K, so we've ended up with a Zorki 4K that has the body covering that it should have, which is this later nylon material, but also has strap lugs, because there was, I think, 1 year where the Zorki 4K was made in this later finish with strap lugs, not with the vulcanite like in this earlier camera, but with this later finish with strap lugs, and it was only made for about a year and I managed to get one, so that was lucky. So this project, right, even 10 or so years ago, 15 years ago, whenever it was, in the back of my mind was, right, I'm going to take that body shell and I'm going to put it on a Zorki 4K. Well, I'll tell you what I did to do that. It's actually not a terribly difficult thing to do. These are very simply put together cameras, and it's really very easy to remove the body shell. So I'll show you how I did it. There are various screws along the top of the camera here, 2 screws here, 2 screws here, and there are also 3 screws on the back. Let me show you more closely. That's going to be, I think, a rather better way to do it. So there's the Zorki, and it is a fairly simple camera to disassemble. We've got a screw here and here, also on the other side one here and one here, and we've got 3 screws along the top there, and we've then got, take off the lens, we've then got these 4 screws that mount the lens mount, keep the lens mount in place, and also the self-timer lever that needs to be taken off. And that's where I went wrong on one of my previous goes. I did sadly damage one of these cameras by turning that screw there that holds the self-timer lever on the wrong way. It's actually a left-hand thread, and I just tore the head off. And sorry to say, I'm very sad to say, I actually damaged and destroyed that camera. It was really just a parts camera after that. However, this one, I learned my lesson and did it the right way. Here you can see the earlier vulcanite finish on the Zorki 4. I actually personally always preferred the later finish with the nylon cloth, but I think most people actually prefer this earlier finish because I think it was perhaps a little more hard wearing and a little more like the Leica cameras on which these were some time ago based. Now, there is no reason why you couldn't use this body shell and this back covered in vulcanite and create a Zorki 4K that is also covered in vulcanite. There's no reason you couldn't do that, but I just prefer this later finish, so I went with the later one. So I'm actually really pleased with this project, and I'm really happy that I've finally, after over a decade, been able to actually do and carry out this plan that's been in the back of my head for some time, and I'll tell you how I did it. So first of all, I took the screws out of the front of the camera. So that's this one at the top here, these two at the top, and the two on the front there. So those screws need to come out first of all. They're fairly easy to get out. Use a good quality screwdriver so you don't damage the screw heads, and go carefully, always go carefully on a job like this and work methodically. Put your parts in a place where they can be recognized, put them in a pattern so that you know where they are and where they go back. So then take out the 3 screws at the back here, same again. Use a good quality screwdriver so you don't mash up the screw heads. These are nice chromed screws, and it's nice to keep them in good condition and not chewed up. Chewed up screws don't look too good, so I went very carefully with this job and very methodically. So after that point, take off the lens of the camera, put it somewhere safe, and you're now ready to take off your lens mount, this aluminium piece here, and there are 4 screws around this lens mount that hold this lens mount in. This has to go back in exactly the same orientation that it came out, so put a little mark on it or something, or put it in a position that you know where it is. The top that's on the camera now, the top of the ring that's on the camera now, has to be the top when it goes back. You can't move that around. Also, there's a paper gasket under here that's been put on at the factory between this lens mount and this body to make sure that that lens distance is exactly the right register. I can't remember the distance now. I think it's 28 point something millimeters, something like that. But it has to be exact, so keep the paper gasket in exactly the same orientation that it came off the camera, and put it back on in that same orientation, and you won't go wrong. Remember, now that you've got the lens off, the shutter curtains are vulnerable, so go very, very carefully, especially if you're using screwdrivers or sharp implements. Next is to take off the self-timer, and I made a silly mistake here the first time around. I turned this left-hand thread screw the wrong way and tore off the top and wrecked the camera, and it's now just a parts camera, and that's a real shame, but you know, there you go, you live and learn, I guess. But I was more careful this time. So that's the final barrier to the body coming off, is this self-timer. There's a couple of bits under here, including a light seal gasket, so be careful with those. Make sure you get them all, and make sure they all go back on in the same order that they came off. So you should now be able to separate the shell from the body, and it wasn't easy on this one. It had been, this is a 1975 camera, so it's been on there very nearly 50 years, quite a long time. So it did put up a little bit of a struggle, but it wasn't too much of a struggle. It was easy enough. Just pull it side to side, work it down, and it'll eventually come off, and you end up with the naked camera works, just the shutter crate and the top. And then once you've got the old shell off, then you can put the new shell on. And as they say in all the best repair manuals, assembly is the reverse procedure of dismantling. So just put everything back in the way that you took it off, and make sure you're careful. Make sure you're careful with those shutter curtains, and you will find, as I found, that after I'd done this process, I ended up with a Zorki 4K with strap lugs. I had always bemoaned the lack of strap lugs on the later Zorkis, the 4K. It was a cost-cutting measure at the factory, obviously, and they did become more cheaply made over time. They're still good cameras. The later ones are still good, competent, reliable if you get one in good condition and that's been serviced. They're reliable cameras. Even without a service, they can be reliable still after 50 years. But I'd always bemoaned the lack of strap lugs on these cameras, and I was really lucky to find that Zorki 4 body with this shell. And I kind of haphazardly, over, gosh, several years, haphazardly wound and worked my way towards this task, this job, this project. And now I've done it, I'm really, really happy with it. I can use this Zorki now without a case. I don't have to have a case to put it around my neck. I know a lot of photographers say don't put a camera around your neck, just hold it, but what if you drop it? Eventually, if you just hold it for long enough, eventually you will drop it. And I don't want to drop it. They're not making these anymore. They weren't expensive when they were new, and they're not expensive now, but they're not making them anymore. So let's preserve them, let's take care of them. And there's now much less risk of dropping this camera when I use it. I've got some Fujicolor 200 to go in it. So me and this camera and the film are going to go out soon and do some shooting, and I'm going to have a lot of fun. I'll let you know the results in a later episode. So, a Zorki 4K with strap lugs. I'm very happy with that. All right, well, the next thing I've got to show you is this beautiful little light meter by Astri-Hori. It is the, what's the model? The AH-M1 light meter. Comes in this little box, and it looks really cool on any old camera, any manual camera that doesn't have a light meter like this Leica here. It makes much easier to use. It's always a faff, I find, holding your phone or a light meter in your hand, checking the reading on there, putting it back in your pocket, dialing the reading in there, composing, getting it out again, checking the light again. It really is such a faff, and it's a slow process. Now, that's not always a bad thing, but sometimes it's nice to speed things up a little as well, and that's what this little thing does. It's really cool, and I really like the way it looks as well. It looks really great on any classic camera. It looks pretty good on this Leica here. Works perfectly. It's perfectly balanced. It doesn't look odd or out of place or too big. It just looks really nice. We'll pop it on the Zorki 4K that we've just sorted out. It's a bit of a tighter fit on the Zorki. It's actually a bit loose on the Leica. It just fits nice and tight on the Zorki, and it looks pretty good on the Zorki. as well. And of course you can use it on any camera with a hot shoe or a cold shoe, a camera with a light meter, just to make double sure, like this old Fed 4 here, on which the light meter is still working and stubbornly refuses to stop working. You can, if you want to check the accuracy, it's a little bit loose on here as well, might need a little bit of paper under there if it's a little bit loose, just to tighten it up a little bit. These are old cameras after all, don't forget, and they've had wear on that cold shoe over the years, so some it will fit nice and snug on that haven't had too much wear, others might need just a little bit of packing. So what was I saying? Yeah, if you've got a camera with a meter that you're not too sure of and you want to make sure you've got the light right, you can use it on there. You can use it on modern cameras. It looks pretty cool on this little Vivitar here. Quite often you'll find that the light meters on these classic cameras, these vintage cameras, quite often don't work, or sometimes they don't work. This makes the camera into a much more usable thing. If your camera doesn't have a light meter, or if it has maybe a slightly unreliable light meter, or if it's been built with a meter but the meter doesn't work, this little device is your friend. I'm going to show you the light meter in a little more close-up detail now, because it's very tiny and you're not going to see it very clearly on this camera, so let's have a look more closely. So there's the box. It comes in this little box, very nicely made box. It's got a little graphic on the front there, that's pretty cool. And inside we find, well, firstly an instruction manual that's upside down. In this case there's the manual, tells you all about it. It's actually pretty simple to use. And in here we get a charging cable. Let's get the things out. We get a little Allen key. I'll show you what that's for in a moment. And we also get a little charging cable. It's quite short, but it works fine. And of course we get the light meter itself, and here is the little light meter. It's a beautiful little thing. It has a button on the back that you push. It's rechargeable. It takes about 40 minutes to charge and it will run for about 12 hours. Apparently it's claimed it will run for about 12 hours. And I don't see any reason to doubt that. There's the sensor at the front that reads the light. Underneath, you can actually change the position of this mounting bracket, and that's quite important because sometimes you'll find, depending on the camera, sometimes you'll find that it's going to cover the controls. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So when I got the light meter, it was actually, the mount was positioned centrally. I don't know if you can see, it's actually over to the side now, but it was actually positioned centrally at first. And I'll pop it on the camera and we can see that if we look down at the top, we'll see that there is our shutter speed control. So we can wind on, and on these Leica cameras and the Leica derived cameras, which many of the former Soviet rangefinders are, you have to lift the control, turn it and drop it into position. They lift, turn and let it go down, and then you can change your speed. Initially this light meter actually covered the shutter speed dial, and I thought, oh my goodness, that's going to be tricky. I'm only going to be able to shoot in aperture priority. So it seemed that the controls were permanently covered. Actually they weren't, because I found out that the mounting plate is adjustable, so you can move it over here to this side as I did, or if you need to, you can move it over here to this side, or you can have it centrally positioned. For the Leica derived cameras, it's best moved over that way. So on the top of this little device, there's an OLED screen there, and just push the button on the back. Here's only one control, and you can see there that we get all of the information. We get shutter speed and aperture, and also the ISO. To change between aperture and shutter priority, push the switch twice and you'll see it change between the two. So there, our shutter speed is fixed and our aperture will change with the light. Push it again, the aperture is fixed and the shutter speed will change with varying light. Now you can use this meter two ways. You can either have a live readout of the lighting conditions as we've got now. So if I cover the sensor, you'll see the shutter speed change there. Or if we do a long press, we then get a spot reading. So when I cover the sensor, it doesn't change. But if I push the button once now, it should change, and I'll take my finger off the sensor, push it again, and it'll change and give us a reading for the available light. So you can have it either live readout, permanent live readout, or instant spot readout for those particular lighting conditions. Personally, I usually leave it on live, and then it's like the old selenium meters that I used to use that gave a constant readout. It's a beautifully made little thing. There's a wheel on the top there, so you just change your settings with that, change your aperture with that. I've got it set to ISO 160 at the moment, and to change the ISO, what do we do now? Let me see if I can remember. I think we do a long press, or one short press and one long press. That's what it was. So it's now gone on to the ISO, and we can change that. And you can see the light change according to the different ISO readings that we're putting in there. So one short and one long press brings it back to shutter or aperture readout. It's a nicely made little thing. It's all metal. The foot is brass, which I think is nice, and I can see that because some of the paint started to wear off. That's fine and to be expected. You know, if you're pushing a thing in and out of camera hot and cold shoes that's painted, it's going to wear, and we've got a nice bit of brass coming through there, so that's nice. The rest of it is probably aluminium. It might be brass. It does feel quite heavy, so it might be brass, but it's certainly nicely made out of good, strong metal. A very nice little thing. So as far as accuracy goes, this little unit seems to be pretty accurate. It agrees with my Fujifilm X-T3 that I'm shooting on at the moment. It agrees with the Panasonic GH2 over here, the B-roll camera for today. It agrees with my Sony A7, except that it seems to read very slightly lower than the Sony. So I'm not sure which is the correct reading there, but it's certainly within an ace. They're within an ace of each other. I also compared it to this Fed 4 meter, and the meter on the Fed, it's got a selenium meter on top there, and the meter on the Fed seems to read about one stop over compared to this little unit here. Was it over or was it under? I think it was under, actually. Yeah, the Fed is reading one stop under approximately, but it's difficult to tell because we've got analog needles and dials and stuff like that, so you can't get an absolutely exact reading with one of these old selenium meters. But it's interesting that the Fed is still shootable. That meter on that Fed is still shootable, certainly with a forgiving sort of film with print film anyway. So accuracy, no problem at all. It's a very accurate little meter. Ease of use, it's very, very easy to use. Style and aesthetics, you know, 27.5 out of 10. It's a beautiful looking thing, and it's really thoughtfully made. It's got this adjustable foot so you can get your to your controls. It's just a very, very nice little thing, and it really looks good, and it suits this old camera. This is, how old is this camera now? 1936. So this is, I'm not very good at sums, getting on for 80 years old. And this little thing agrees with its aesthetics perfectly, and it also agrees with the aesthetics of a Zorki 4 or 4K perfectly. It looks really good on one of them. In fact, it looks really good on pretty much any camera. I can't really think of a camera that this little thing wouldn't look very good on, and I can't think of a camera that this little thing wouldn't be really useful on as well. And it certainly turns these older all manual cameras without meters, it certainly turns them into much faster machines. I find it far easier to have a light meter on the camera than to go mucking about with handheld devices that slow things down. So there we are, a stylish, practical, well-made and very, very useful little thing. So a very nice little piece of kit. So I'm going to load up some film into my not quite unique but very unusual and reasonably uncommon Zorki here. I've got my Fujicolor 200 ready to go into it, and I will let you know of the results in an upcoming episode. So I think that's probably it from me for this week. So many thanks for tuning in and watching. Many thanks to subscribers for your support. If you've enjoyed this episode, please do chuck us a sub, that would be appreciated. And many thanks go to patrons for your support. Thank you very much for that. That's really appreciated. And if you like the channel and you've enjoyed the episode and you like the material that this channel's putting out, why not consider becoming a patron yourself? You can do it over at www.patreon.com/Zenography, and you can do that for $1 or from $1 per month. As for me, that's it from this week. I'm off to shoot my Zorki. Rainy weather or not, I'm going to take an umbrella and see what I can do. Thanks again for tuning in. If you're not doing anything too irksome, difficult or bothersome next week, please do join me at this time for a spot more Zenography. Cheerio all.